Hey Ron, it's good to chat with you. And I'm glad whenever I get to sit and talk to the designer of anything, whether it's guitars or amps or stomp boxes or anything. I've had the chance to kind of mess around with the full English for a while and I did a demo on it the other day. So, like I said, it's kind of like I'm getting to talk to the dream maker behind the machine. So, I guess my first question for you is what's the motivation behind the full English? I know that you had another programmable stomp box before this, the Overdrive. So, tell me what was the evolution going into the full English? Why'd you build it? Why now? What were you thinking? What was the design idea?
It definitely started with the Overture, which I designed in 2020. It seemed like an interesting challenge. And, there were only a tiny number of programmable overdrives on the market, many of which aren't even being sold anymore. And it's like, just thinking, well, I know a bunch of guys who are always saying, well, I can only put so much on my board and, pedals take up space and they take up money and all that. So it's like, well, what if we could get a whole selection of overdrives in a box, but do it, fully analog and I've been doing analog stuff that's been digital controlled for years and years. Let's apply this to an overdrive and make something that's really kind of efficient, to have a bunch of designs in a relatively small box, but not have to give up all of what you'd expect out of an analog overdrive. So basically the Overture was sort of one family of overdrives, one kind of overall flavor. And then the idea was, well, after that one came out and, people generally liked it, but, not everyone likes that particular type of flavor of overdrive. There are quite a few out there, and at least a few sort of
Right.
major families.
And
And so,
if you're sorry to interrupt,
sure,
if
yeah.
any of the viewers are unfamiliar with it, it would be a world famous historical green mid forward overdrive that we've heard of 10,000 times. So
Yeah, that would be it. And right. And so, but then, after that one had been out for a while, I said, there are other overdrives out here. So the full English, as the name might suggest, brings to mind a whole series of British overdrives with, British kind of drive sounds. And so where the overture is a mid forward and compressed and smoother, the full English is, more aggressive, or at least it certainly can be, less compressed, more transparent, and, not as particularly focused in the mids and all that. And so was, applying a new set of sort of classic sounds, and some of the modes are ones that I just came up with as well. At any rate, and just kind of using that same technology that we developed to, come up with something new and, cover some ground that other players might prefer. And the other trick also was to add the three band EQ in the full English, which the other one didn't have.
sure, and I think that's one of the things that's great about both of them is, one could make an argument that you don't really need six of the same flavor of overdrive in one pedal. But what I'll tell you is that when I change guitars, when I change amps, or a lot of times, even if I change the section of a song, if I'm going from a big intro or if I'm going to, try and decrescendo down into a quieter verse or a breakdown or something, those EQ changes become really, really important. And rather than having to squat down and change knobs on a pedal, it's really handy to be able to reshape a single overdrive with presets like you could with the Overture. There's absolutely a reason why a player would really, really love all that programmability, even though it is kind of one family of overdrive. And I think as it pertains to the full English, there's something that is so beautiful about that, the kind of upper mid range and the teeth that you find in some of these more British sounds. I think they really cut through these big dense mixes, So I think what you've done here is something really, really beautiful. I already had someone on an online forum ask me for clarity on this. There is going to be some question. There's a lot of blinky lights on the front, and there's 5-pin MIDI in and out on the back of it. It is 100% analog in the audio path. Is that correct?
Yeah, for sure. There's digital stuff, but only for the purpose of controlling the analog stuff. There's no digitization of your signal or anything like that. These overdrive circuits are in the pedal, and it's just the digital stuff kind of sits around it and kind of act as like, I don't know, a traffic cop or something, and kind of, helping to route and control the signal. But yeah, it truly is an analog overdrive, like, for where it's important to be, which is, where the actual signal goes through.
Sure. I love it. I love it. I think what you've done here is really great. And I appreciate you chatting about the reasons you made it and all that good stuff. So thanks again. If anybody wants to check it out, full English, worth every penny you'll pay for it. Pay twice as much, it's still worth it.
Thanks so much, I appreciate it.